Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to What's on the Playlist today. Um, Cold is still lingering, so my voice is a little bass than usual. Whew, I can really hit those low notes, can't I? You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. Shame I couldn't keep that. Well, anywho, got off topic. Today I want to talk about Tom Petty and the Heartbrakers debut album, self-titled Tom Petty and the Heartbrakers, an image of which you will see here. This album was released in, I think, 1976. The band itself is from Gainesville, Florida. Tom Petty had been in a couple other bands before this one. Performed this with some other guys. Made the first album. Yada yada yada. They released "Breakdown" as the single for the album, and this album was a flop. Kind of. I don't want to say a flop, but like it did not get any traction at all in the U.S. And then, but for some reason in Great Britain and England, it was a hit. It hit like the album hit number 24 on the UK charts. And so the band went over there to tour in England, and Tom Petty was like, "Man, I can't believe it. These guys are like loving our music. They're on the dance floor, dancing their brains out." So pumped. And like after about a year of, you know, no one in the U.S. paying attention to this album, word of its success in the UK filtered back to the US, and they re-released Breakdown. Yeah, Breakdown. At which point, it broke the top 40. It became one of their staple songs, along with American Girl, which is on this, which I didn't realize that was on their first album. It's one of those songs that you associate with the band, but I didn't realize it was like one of their first songs. I did go through and listen to a bunch of the songs. I kind of did a quick once through to kind of familiarize us with the album so I could talk about it a bit more. And honestly, I can almost see why this album didn't do as well in the US upon its first release. The first song on the album is Rockin' Around With You. Breakdown, the title, is the single. Second song. Third song is Hometown Blues. And going through the albums, the first song, "Rockin' Around With You" and "Hometown Blues," do not really match the sound of the rest of the album. The rest of the album sounds like a Tom Petty and Heartbreakers album, but very, very early in the album, there's these two songs that are kind of dissonant, that kind of break from the feel of the album. So I can kind of see how maybe it didn't get as much traction initially because, the good Tom Petty songs are buried a bit further down the album. Breakdown is the second song. American Girl is the last song on side 2. Remember, back in the 70s, these were on vinyl, had to flip the album over to play side 2. So, songs that were on side 2 tended to get to hit people's minds a bit less frequently. A lot of times people would just, play side 1 and get excited and play it again if they like the song a lot. Not me. I'm a music junkie. I always play the full album all the way through. But Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers was also one of those bands that like I didn't realize how much I liked them. They're a solid rock and roll band, and the first two songs I mentioned are also the roughest too. They're not quite as tight and polished as some of the other songs on the album are. A couple of them I think I was listening to. I think it's Anything That's Rock and Roll. That song kind of starts off a little weak, but the rest of the song is okay. Yeah, aside from, even Breakdown is kind of musically simple, but not bad. Nothing wrong with a simple song. But to have the rest of the album be a bit more polished than some of the early songs on it. But going back to how I felt about the band, it was one of those bands that the music was always playing in the background, but I never noticed it. It didn't. I liked it. I liked it a lot, but it didn't hit me how much of the songs I liked until I started paying attention, which wasn't for several years after this. You know, these weren't songs that, you know, kind of grabbed me and made me like, you got to listen to this stuff. It's the stuff that kind of quietly sat in the back of my head. It's like, man, I really like this song kind of thing. And I just didn't realize how many of those songs that there were that Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers put out that are just solid pieces of music that just kind of like, you know, they just kind of sat in the back, kind of percolated, never really raised their voices, never really, you know, reach out to try and grab me and make me and force me to look at them until I started trying to build a record collection. You know, early on, like in the 70s, still a poor kid with no money. Was I working when this album came out? How old was I? Yes, I would have had my first job when this album came out. I was bussing tables. But at the time, was I? No, wait. No, I wasn't working then. My first job would have been in 78. Sorry. So, yeah. Around the time this album was released in the U.S., actually, around the time this album started to become popular in the U.S., yes, I would have been working and had some pocket money. But I also lived in a little town that didn't have any place to buy records. You know, I didn't have any way to get anywhere. I lived in a small little town of 5,000 people on the mid coast of Maine. We had a Rennie's, and they didn't sell records. I had to drive 20 miles to get to a record store, and I didn't have a car. So, yeah, I didn't start buying music for myself until actually after I graduated high school, when I actually had a car of my own and could drive around on my own. You know, I had a small, up until the time I was 18 or 19 years old, I had maybe like 6 or 8 records of my own. Maybe as many as a dozen. And those I'd gotten as gifts for like Christmas and birthdays and stuff, because I had nowhere to buy them on my own. So, you know, it took me several years to really start building a record collection, start realizing, oh, I like this band. Maybe I should buy some of their stuff. And that's when I realized how much of their stuff I actually liked. And they're also, I'm not sure how much it shows off in this album, but Tom Petty has a quirky sense of humor, and it doesn't really show up as much in this album. It isn't until you start getting into MTV days, probably about 5 or 6 years after this album came out, maybe even longer than that. Yeah, about 6 or 7 years after this album came out, MTV came along, and he started putting out some music videos that definitely showed he was a bit out there. So I liked that. That's another thing that made me start paying attention to him more, is the weird music videos they had. But that's related to other albums. I do think, aside from the couple songs that I've mentioned, this is a solid debut album. It's a bit shaky in places, but it is also a staple of American rock and roll. It's become one of those, I think Rolling Stones listed as one of the top 1,001 albums you should listen to before you die. So, if you listen to Rolling Stones, I guess you should listen to it. If you listen to me, it's a decent album. It's an American classic. Give it a whirl. As always, thanks for watching. I'm gonna go a bit extra and apologize for my cold and the fact that I'm probably mumbling more than usual because I'm a bit congested and my voice is deep and raspy. As always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.